We're actually in part 2 of this series that we started last week called Marriage Evaluation. And this is important. Like I said, if you're pre-marriage, if you're in marriage, if you're post-marriage, whatever the scenario, this is going to be an important thing for you to grasp. The idea of evaluating something is to find the right value, find the right cost, right? What it is actually worth. And that's what we want to do with marriage during this series. What we said is we really believe as we look through God's word that God has one evaluation of marriage, what he values it as. And we believe that our culture has a different valuation of marriage. These are really two different valuations currently. We believe that God has this extremely high value of marriage and that our culture is kind of slowly just creeping towards less and less value in marriage. They don't really talk about it as a valuable commodity, as a valuable institution or whatever that is. So the idea of why this is important is because you are going to have to decide which one you're going to trust more. Which evaluation are you going to trust? Are you going to trust God's evaluation of marriage? Or are you going to trust culture's evaluation of marriage? Because they're going to take you in two massively different ways, whether you're pre-marriage or you're in marriage right now. In fact, this is our opinion, okay? The distance between your evaluation of marriage and God's evaluation of marriage is the determining factor between your marriage's success or your health. That's going to be what decides it. So last week, we talked all about the foundation, right? Laid the foundation of what God has to say. If you weren't here, if you weren't with us online, go back and watch that because all of the rest of what we're talking about today, the next 2 weeks are going to build on that idea. I don't just want you to go back and watch it because we taught it. I think it's important for the rest of this from where we go today.
Yeah, so today we want to talk about how do we value marriage before we get there. So today we're going to be talking a lot about you if you're not married yet, but don't tune out if you are married because there's stuff that applies to those of us who are married as well. So today we're talking about singles, whether you're young, you're college age, high school age, and you're single, not yet married, or you might be post-marriage, you might be middle-aged and find yourself in a season of singleness as well. But whatever season we're in, it's important for us to consider how do we value marriage in whatever season that we are in. So if you're single, I'm guessing that 2020 was an interesting, maybe different year for you navigating it as a single person. Of course, we had forced isolation with the lockdowns, where you couldn't even go on a date at a restaurant if you wanted to. I thought I had a moment when we were in the year, like, what are people doing? Like, who just want to go on a date? Like, you can't even go to a restaurant with somebody. What are single people doing? And kind of just thinking about that, it was probably a very different year to navigate. It might have been harder to meet somebody or not, because in 2019, it actually finally crossed over where the number one way we meet our significant other in America is online. So before 2019, online was a factor, but still the number one way was always proximity. So somebody who was close to us in proximity, whether the same college as we were, the same church, somebody we knew growing up with, that was always the number one way that we met. We found our significant other. But now it is officially the number one way we meet each other is online. So that definitely changes things. Apps like OkCupid, Bumble, Tinder, these are the most popular apps that most single people have as a way of meeting people to date. And last week we talked a lot about, we kind of like compared culture's view of marriage with what God says about marriage. And so thinking about that, I was thinking, what does our culture say about dating? What are like the rules in dating in our culture? And to be honest, there's not many like universal rules with dating. It's pretty open. You date whoever you want. You do whatever you want for as long as you want, and it's very customizable. And especially when you talk about online, you see the picture, you see all the info, and if you don't like it, you can swipe. And it's kind of very different when we think about it. In compared to previous years, now there's new challenges and new benefits, I'm sure, as well. But there's new dating trends. I was reading up in research for this message. They say there's hardballing. There's slow dating, there's paper clipping, and woke fishing. If you don't know what that is, it's the new catfishing is woke fishing. Google it if you want to know more. But it was very interesting to me because it's been a while. It's been 11 years since we were dating, so I had to get up on the current lingo. So OkCupid, the most popular dating app, has over 2 million users, and they did a survey. Over 2 million people responded, and so 64% of those people said they preferred to date someone who shared their political values. So that's important now, somebody who shares your views politically. And then also 89% of people said that they think you should live with your partner before marriage. So that's a big number. 89%, almost 9 out of 10 people believe that you should live with somebody before you get married. So that's kind of just a brief snapshot of some of the things that are going on in our culture with dating. But I think it's important to think about and just answer the question, why does it matter what we think about marriage if we're not even married?
Right, because there can be that feeling like if you are pre-marriage, well, so this marriage series isn't really even for me. But to be honest with you, when we set out to teach this marriage series, this was one of the ones that were most exciting to us, is talking about how we prepare and get ready for marriage. In fact, I want you to read this verse with me real quick. It's Hebrews 13:4 in the NIV, and here's what it says, okay? Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure. For God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. Now, most of us, when we read that verse, we think it's a verse about married people, right? That's what we'd say, is it's about you're not supposed to commit adultery. But we could miss the first sentence in that. Can you put it back up for me real quick? The first sentence of that verse is, marriage should be honored by all. It says that actually the idea of honoring marriage isn't just for married people, that we're all supposed to honor marriage, even us who are not yet married, right? Marriage isn't something that we wait to start honoring once we have one. We actually need to start before. In fact, this is kind of the big picture of where we're going today. We believe this: if you want a valuable marriage, you can't wait until you're married to start valuing it. If you want a valuable marriage, you can't wait until you're married to start valuing it. That's not the way it works. And we're going to actually talk through 3 practical ways this makes sense. Now, for all of you who are married out there who think, well, okay, so this isn't for me, listen, I need you to listen, because you are going to be the people that unmarried people come and ask questions about this stuff. They go, you're married, tell me. And instead of you just sharing just like cultural quips or just like, well, in my opinion, talk to them about this stuff, okay? Have a real foundation to share with it. Some of you as well, you got kids who are going to be coming up and starting to date. Don't just tell them like, well, here's what I think. Give them good foundation. So if you are married, listen, you need to listen just as much, because you are likely going to be someone that an unmarried person is going to come to and ask, and you want to be able to give them this wisdom. So here's 3 ways that we can value marriage before we even get to it, okay? Number 1, we can become the right person. We can become the right person. Marriage is not what makes you valuable. There's that old Bing Crosby, Dean Martin song. I don't know if some of you guys know it. You're nobody until somebody loves you. Have you guys heard that one? Terrific song. It's a great song. It's just not true. It's just not true, okay? You are somebody before somebody loves you, okay? You really do have value. God says that you are valuable as you are. You don't wait until you get married for like your life to start or the purpose of your life to start. And focusing on becoming the right person is a great way to honor marriage. First of all, you have value in who you are, but also if someday you're going to walk into a marriage, you want to walk into it the very best version of yourself you can be. The Bible does not command us to be married. This is important. Marriage is offered as a gift, but it's not a command that we are told we have to do. We can actually honor marriage, get this, by not participating in it. That's another way that we can honor it. We can see it in high value and choose not to be part of it. In fact, this was the case for some really, really important people in the Bible, like Jesus. Pretty important, right? John the Baptist, Paul, these men who are kind of like these towering giants in the New Testament, none of them were ever married. And yet they honored marriage by their living. In fact, here's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7:7. But I wish everyone were single just as I am. Yet each person has a special gift from God of one kind or another. He says, it'd be great if everybody was single like me, because I'm able to just focus on serving God. I wish all of you guys could do this, right? But he basically says, although it depends on what kind of gift you've been given. It's not that I'm doing something less. It's just different. It's not as if, I'm not honoring marriage. I'm honoring marriage in a different way. And in fact, Jesus kind of said the same thing. One time he's talking about marriage with his disciples, and he talks about how God's the only one who can end up taking marriages back apart. You can't just quit it whenever you want to. And they're realizing, wow, this is a really high valuation of it. And they think about how they could honor this. And they basically come to the conclusion, maybe we shouldn't even get married. We don't know if we can actually live up to that. And this is what they say in Matthew 19:10 through 12, Jesus' response as well. It says, Jesus' disciples then said to him, well, if this is the case, maybe it's better not to marry. Like, if it's really this serious, maybe it's better not to marry. This is what Jesus says. Not everyone can accept this statement. Only those whom God helps. Some are born eunuchs, some have been made eunuchs by others, and some choose not to marry for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can. He specifically says, not everyone can accept that statement, only really those whom God would help, which I would say goes back to this, what Paul was saying, that really the only way that you're going to be able to walk through that single life, if that is where you're supposed to be, is if you get what Paul calls the gift of singleness, which is what he talks about in 1 Corinthians.
Right. And I think sometimes people can get scared in church, single people, like when we talk about the gift of singleness, like starting to think, like, do I have
They're
that?
hoping they don't have it.
I
They're
don't
like,
want
please,
that
God,
gift.
don't give me that gift, right?
I don't want that
it.
gift of singleness. Like, is that me? You might be panicking right now thinking, I really hope God didn't give me that. But those who are called to singleness, like we see the example of Paul. Paul was totally okay with his gift of singleness.
Yeah, he wasn't talking about his singleness like he hated it. He was talking about it in a positive way.
Right, and he saw the benefits of it, and really points to the fact that it was his choice, that he had chosen not to marry in order to really honor marriage and to choose not to participate in it and to just serve God with everything he had. So if you're wondering if that's you, I think just a good test is just ask yourself, do you want to be single? If the answer is no, then you probably don't have the gift of singleness. It's okay to have that desire to have a spouse and if God really did give you the gift of singleness, is calling you to singleness, he's going to give you the gifts that are going to equip you to live out that calling. He's going to give you those spiritual gifts to make it possible. The desire for a spouse is something that we believe that it's a longing that God put inside of us. Now, we talked about last week and also some this week about the idea that Christ completes us, that we're a whole and complete person without another person, that our marriage isn't what completes us, it's Christ. So when we think back to the Garden of Eden when Adam was created, Adam was in perfect relationship with God. He had a perfect relationship with him. There was no sin entered in the world yet, so it was absolutely perfect. So he should have been complete, right? I mean, like, he was set. There shouldn't be anything. He shouldn't be longing for anything. But God said it wasn't good for him to be alone because God had put another longing inside of Adam. He put that longing there for a woman. And so when God created Eve, Adam said, at last, pointing to the fact that that was something he was wanting. He said, at last, flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone. So God put that desire in him. And we see over and over in Scripture that God meets our desires with what we're desiring. So Jesus, in the New Testament, he meets the longing for thirst, our longing for water, with water. He meets people's longing for food with food. And so we believe that when we have a desire for a spouse, God meets that desire with a spouse. It's not as if God is punishing you with singleness or like he wants to withhold a good thing from you. We believe that that desire is God-given, and then if it really is something you desire, that God's going to meet that spouse. He'll fulfill that longing with a spouse. So if you desire that, God is most likely going to fill that desire with a spouse.
Yeah, and the idea that that desire, like you said, comes from God, that's the reality. In fact, most of us are going to be married. The broad majority of us will be married because we have that desire that God has put in us, and that's a good desire. It's finding the right way to live it out. In fact, Paul knew this. When he wrote that same thing that he wrote to the Corinthians about, I wish a lot of you were more single like me, he says this, though, in the same chapter, 1 Corinthians 7:2. He says, but because there is so much sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband. In verse 8-9, he continues and says, I say to those who aren't married and to widows, it's better to stay unmarried just as I am. Like he's saying, you can do a lot, but if they can't control themselves, they should go ahead and marry. It's better to marry than to burn with lust. Even in another section, he basically says, like, you can stay single or you can get married. One's not really necessarily better than the other. They're both ways which we can honor marriage. And he's saying basically practically in this, I think the majority of us are going to find in ourselves a strong desire for sexual intimacy with a partner. And he says that's not a bad thing, just the reality is then you need to find the right way to live that out, which of course would be the idea of every woman finding her husband and every man finding his wife, to be in that relationship where we can have a holy and a healthy way to live out that relationship and live out our sex life, right? So for most of us, singleness, if we're in that season, it is just that. It's a season that we are walking through until we get to the place where we're married. Now, you are valuable right now where you are. You're not waiting for marriage in order to become valuable. But also, this is an important time where you can begin to add value to yourself so you can carry greater value into the marriage relationship someday.
Right. Because healthy relationships are made up of healthy individuals.
Yes.
So if we want to have a valuable, healthy marriage, we need to make sure we're bringing a healthy version of ourselves to the marriage. And like we talked about last week, we know marriage is not to make us happy, it's to make us holy. So we don't walk into marriage thinking, this is finally what's going to make me happy, this is what's going to fulfill me. We walk into marriage ready to serve and give to the other person, not looking for them to complete us. We walk in a whole person, fulfilled on our own, not looking to that person to give us that fulfillment. Something really good that I think I heard Andy Stanley say, he said, become the person you're looking for is looking for. So when we talk about finding a spouse and dating, it's important to start with who we are and to think, who am I looking for? Okay, become the person you're looking for is looking for. So if you're looking for a strong Christian person, you become a strong Christian person because that person is going to be looking for someone like that. If you're looking for someone with ambition and with drive, you better have a job and better be an ambitious person as well because that's the kind of person the person you're looking for is going to be looking for. So it starts by looking at ourselves and working on ourselves and just remembering that we can use the season of singleness. Like you said, it's most likely it's going to be a season for most of us, some longer than others. But when we look at Paul, he always points to the fact that singleness, you can serve God with so much more than if you're married. He said a married man, he has to think about his wife. He has to worry about her, but I don't because I'm single. I can use all my time. And he points to the fact that singleness is such a great opportunity to serve God. And so most of us, it'll just be a season that we're single. And just recognizing that every season we go through has strengths and it has struggles. Being married has strengths and struggles. Having kids has strengths. And every season we walk through in life, there's going to be hard parts about it and good parts about it. So recognizing what are the good parts about being single and kind of maximizing those when we are.
Yeah, because it's a really great opportunity. That's actually my story personally. So for me personally, I was in high school. I had dated a bunch of girls during kind of my first couple years of high school. And then basically at the end of my sophomore year, I think beginning of my junior year, I was 16 years old. I ended up deciding that I really, really wanted to focus on my relationship with God. I wanted to focus on that. So I just decided I'm just not dating anymore. And I literally did that for the next 7 years. I never went on one date. From 16 all the way until 23, I just said, you know what, I'm not going to date during this season. And instead, I focused on that idea of becoming the person who I wanted to be. And it was a great opportunity to be able to walk through. I was able to accomplish a ton of things as far as like growing in skills and education. I was able to go and serve radically in ministries. I was able to travel around the world, get to go overseas into different countries and teach and work with a ministry that I was helping with. Not only that, but God called me during that time to start the foundations of Acts Church. And it was a great season where I was able to just kind of really serve God in such an enthusiastic way where, I was working 80, 90, 100 hours a week. And it was able to do that because I didn't have a wife or kids or any of that. I could just pour into that and become the right person during that season. It was a huge blessing for me, for sure. Some people, of course, looked at me during that time and thought, you're missing out, Cameron. You're missing out on all this fun dating stuff. But to be honest with you, I thought, missing out on what? Distraction? Heartache? Temptation for sin? What am I missing out on? Because I wasn't ready to get married at the time. So here's a great opportunity where instead of me being so worried about someone else's heart right now, I can just focus on my own. Instead of being so worried about taking care of someone else, I could just grow my own skills and I could really, really serve during that time. And I think it was a huge benefit for me because by the time I got to 23 and then we pursued a relationship, I had really become the person who I think added value to a marriage. I had set some foundations in my life. I had had some experiences where I got to serve God. I'd done things financially, some of those things that were benefits by the time I walked into marriage, and I brought something beneficial to the marriage.
Right. Not dating is always an option.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't hear about that very much anymore, but like we both had made the decision when we were teenagers just not to date. Mm-hmm. And so that's, you can still do that. You can just choose to not date, to focus on God. And like we said, your life doesn't start when you get married, and like your calling from God doesn't start when you get married. And I think that was something really important for me too, was that I decided, like, I'm not going to focus on dating. I'm not going to focus on guys right now. I'm just going to focus on God's calling for my life. And that was what kind of led me to be part of the church plant, too, where God added you into it later on. But I was just focusing on, you know what, I feel called to be part of this church plant. And so no matter how old you are, you know, young, just focus on God's call for your life. And there's always the option to just not date and focus on God. So first and foremost, we want to value marriage by becoming the right person. Next, we want to value marriage by choosing the right person. And that's exactly what we believe. We believe we get to choose. We don't believe in soulmates. We don't believe there's one person out there that God has for you, and if you miss that person, you mess it all up. We believe that God presents candidates for us, maybe multiple, across different seasons of your life, people who you could choose. You get to use your brain, and you get to just make the best choice of who you want to walk through this life with. Proverbs 18:22 says, "The man who finds a wife finds a treasure, and he receives favor from the Lord." So the emphasis is on finds. We are part of the process in finding a spouse. It's not as if God destines one person for us. It's not as if God drops a person on our doorstep for us. We find that person. So if we get the right value of marriage and see how God values marriage, that's going to impact the way we go about finding that person.
Yeah, exactly. Because all of us basically, when we're in this journey of trying to find the other person, I don't think people would specify it this way, but basically what we do is we set up a filter system in our life, right? We set up these filters and we take the cloud of people who we see and we run these through these filters and kind of see who falls through them to the next one, and then run them through another filter and who comes through. And at the end, we kind of have the person who we're going to be with. The problem with that, though, is our culture, especially I think just what's happening right now with dating, we can get these filters out of sorts. I mean, for instance, the fact that the number one way people are meeting people right now is online or through an application means most likely the first filter that we're putting up for the person we're looking for is hot or not, right? Literally the first thing we do is just see a picture of them. And it's like, are they sexy? Are they not? Like swipe left, swipe right? Like, do they attract my eye? And that's the very first filter. And then we start working from there. But is that really the first filter we should have in place, right? Is that the first one that we should go through? Because the way that we order these filters are going to help us make the very most of this. And for us, what we believe is if you're a Jesus follower and you're interested in finding your spouse, you still are going to use these filters. But what we need you to do, and what we think God's word is pointing to, is you need to set up your very first filter as, do they love Jesus? The first filter you run people through to find the candidate of who you're going to be with is, do they love Jesus? And make sure, how I said this, I didn't say, are they a Christian? I didn't say, do they sometimes go to church? I didn't say, do they come from a Christian family? I didn't say, they'd be willing to go to church with me. I said, do they love Jesus? Does their life represent a life that loves Jesus, their finances, their time? And if that's your first filter, it sets you up for such success, because I've found these people who are Christians and they start dating and they go, oh, they're interesting, they're this, they're this, and this. And then you go, are they a Christian? And they go, well, no. And you go, well, then you shouldn't have wasted all your energy and effort and heart on this person, because that should be the first filter that you put in to say the first thing is, do you love Jesus? And then we can work from there. I mean, then guys, girls, if you set that one up first, if you want the next one to be hot, go for it, right? If it's like, love Jesus, next one's like, who's banging, right? Who looks good, right? That person, that's fine. Put that as your second filter. But it's really, really important to have that first one as basically loves Jesus. And this isn't just my opinion, right? What does Paul say on this?
Right. So 2 Corinthians 6:14 and 15 says, don't team up with those who are unbelievers. How can righteousness be a partner with wickedness? How can light live with darkness? What harmony can there be between Christ and the devil? How can a believer be a partner with an unbeliever? So if you're old school, you would know the term as unequally yoked. So the Bible talks about this. We can't team up with somebody who doesn't value the same things as we do. That's the most important thing when you're looking to choose somebody, is finding out, do they love Jesus? And really coming to terms with that, because I think we can do a really good job of convincing ourselves. And I've had enough friends throughout the years who have dated, and they do a really good job convincing themselves and trying to convince you, well, he says he's a Christian, and he says he'll go to church with me sometimes, and we convince ourselves. But if you have to convince yourself before marriage, you're going to have to straight up lie to yourself after marriage. As much as it might hurt to break a relationship now, or to not even start a relationship that looks really good, as much as it might hurt now, you save yourself so much heartache in the long run, because we know so many couples who, because of different circumstances, getting saved later in life when their spouse didn't, it causes so much conflict and heartache in the relationship. When the person you love the most, when you love Jesus and your spouse doesn't, it causes so much heartache. And just save yourself all of that by starting now.
And that's why I think he says it. He's not saying it to like limit our pool of who we can be with. It's because he recognizes the fact that even if everything else is great, wow, you attracted them, wow, the hardest part is they don't love the same God you love. That's going to be so difficult. He says the amount of struggle that's going to come with that is way more than, say, if it's somebody else who maybe you don't see eye to eye on some other things as much. Having that in common is going to be so critical.
Right, because marriage is all about the mission. And so if Jesus really is your number one, you want a spouse who has Jesus as their number one as well, because marriage is us side by side working towards this mission together. So you need somebody who's going to be going in the same direction as you, who's going to be on the same mission as you. And I think this is really important too, especially girls, women, as we're looking for a potential spouse. Really realizing, does this man love Jesus? Because the Bible says the man's the head of the household. The man really has this special responsibility to lead his family towards Jesus. So we're looking for the man who's going to not only lead us towards Jesus, but our future children. And so it's not a light thing. It's not something to take lightly, to really consider, does this man, is he going to lead me and my family towards Jesus? So that's really the most important thing that we want to consider.
Yeah, that's good. And that's really what happened in our relationship. Just to kind of tell you again, like kind of our story, that was ours, is we kind of used that same filter system. We knew each other, and that was the benefit, is that Amy and I knew each other, and we had seen each other serve Jesus, where we knew that both we loved Jesus. I knew that she loved Jesus. She knew that I did. So that was already there. But kind of at that time when we, right before dating, there were other people around us who went through that first filter as well. There were other girls who were connected to like our community who loved Jesus, who were great girls. They passed through that filter. There were other guys who loved Jesus who passed through that filter. So, but once that first one was set, it was really easy, because then it was the idea of having the conversation of how you kind of interact. And I mean, I interacted. I started the pursuit. I mean, obviously, she's good looking, isn't she? So I was like, I saw her and I was like, hi, you love Jesus. I am very attracted to you. We should talk, right? And I started that relationship and went from there. And then I realized, wow, we get along. We're really, and same ideas as far as like friendship-wise, hanging out together. Man, we're good friends and all these different pieces. And it became natural to work through those filters to go, hey, this is the person who I think I want to marry. Now, we've said this before, and I know sometimes people think like, this sounds so unromantic. We said we could have married someone else. I could have picked a different girl out of that group to pursue. Amy could have picked a different guy to start dating as well. We don't believe that it's like God like destined us to be together and that we're like two halves who come together. And sometimes people are like, well, that sounds so unromantic, the idea that like, what do you mean? But honestly, we think it's more romantic. If you're just destined to be with that person, it means you had nothing to do with it. We don't believe that God destined us to be together. We chose each other. I knew she loved Jesus, and I said, I choose you because I think you are the most beautiful. I think you are the most interesting. I think you are the most fascinating. And then she chose me and said, yeah, you're the man who I'm interested in being with. And honestly, I think it's more romantic because we chose each other then, and we choose each other today still of saying, you're the one who I want to be with.
Right. Of course, we've had those conversations like, what if we wouldn't have got married? Who would we have married? And honestly, like there was, like you were saying, there was really good people around us, if we would have married someone else. And honestly, it's like, if you have that first thing in common, if you have Jesus in common, yeah, we could have married other people and probably been really happy and fine.
It would have been a different marriage,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'm sure God would have still worked through it to make it a good marriage.
Right. It's just having that first thing in common is what's so important when you're choosing somebody. So how we value marriage before we get there, we want to start with becoming the right person. We want to choose the right person. And then lastly, we want to do it the right way. So the Bible makes it clear that there's some things that should be saved for the marriage relationship. That verse we read in the beginning, Hebrews 13:4, it says, "Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and the sexually immoral." So God created sex to exist within this lifelong covenant relationship. Sex is not for those relationships where you only give part of yourself, where you give your time, maybe some of your emotions, and then you give the physical part. Sex was not created for those relationships. Sex was created for the husband and wife relationship, in which you give your whole self legally, socially, emotionally, and then lastly, physically. God created it for that relationship, and so anything outside of that relationship is outside of what God created it for.
Yeah, and the reason why this is important is because we believe that God says marriage has this extremely high value, and we think that sex is the very same. That what he was saying is that the idea is sex is this treasure that's meant to be saved and then used inside of this very, very valuable relationship called marriage. That it's because of this covenant between man and wife and God doing that's when we use that part of our relationship. Now, our culture doesn't believe this at all, obviously. Our culture basically does married people things before they're married. That's how they basically date. They start having sex before they're married. They end up moving in and living together, right? Well, she said 9 out of 10 people figure you should live together before you get married. Basically, our culture says, yeah, you put your finances together. Maybe you buy a house together. You buy something together. Heck, nowadays, maybe you even have a kid together and then decide whether or not you want to get married afterwards, doing all these married people things first. But listen, God has a completely different picture for that. Our culture says practice marriage and decide if you want to do it. God says prepare for marriage. We don't practice marriage. God says we prepare for marriage and then we step into it. Culture says we practice marriage, and it's two completely different perspectives. God is saying that there are these valuable things that are so rich and such treasures. They only belong inside of this highly evaluated place of marriage. And practicing these things, listen, we believe doesn't make the marriage stronger. We actually believe it makes them weaker. Practicing these things before we're married isn't going to make our marriage stronger. We actually believe it's going to make it weaker. And I understand some people would say, well, Cameron, that just sounds so silly. I mean, doing these things are going to have to increase our understanding of each other, living together, having sex with each other. It's going to create this connection where it's going to make the possibility of us getting married stronger. That just sounds silly. And I would say, well, it is. But do you really believe that God is the one who created marriage? Because if it is just that culture created marriage, then maybe you're right. But if God created marriage, if he's the designer, is it possible that he knows something about what he created and what he designed that we don't? Culture's saying that doesn't seem like it's beneficial. He says it is. Is it possible he knows something that we don't? Let me just ask you these questions real quick to see, okay? Do you believe that our culture is getting closer to the evaluation of marriage that God has, or farther away from it? It kind of feels like our culture is getting farther and farther away from the same evaluation of marriage as God has, right? It definitely feels that way. But here's my second question. In your opinion, does it seem like marriages are getting stronger and better, or does it seem like marriages are getting weaker? It kind of feels like marriages are getting weaker, doesn't it? Like we see so many people getting divorced. We see it just so much, these issues inside of it. Is it possible that although culture says this is going to help, what if actually as we're going farther away from God's design, it's actually harming it? And we would go, well, that doesn't seem like it would be right, but what if the designer has knowledge that we don't have? And perhaps the idea of not practicing these things, but instead retaining them for marriage would actually be a higher benefit for the marriage. See, we believe that sexual intimacy is made for the man and woman inside of covenant, and we give honor to marriage by not participating in it until we are married. And this is really important, okay? we don't have sex with somebody who's not our husband or our wife because that person might be someone else's husband or wife. You see, the way we value marriage before we get to it is by valuing the idea that this is this treasure made for marriage. So we would never have sex with somebody who isn't our husband or wife because it's possible that person is someone else's husband or wife. You go, oh, no, we're going to get married. Are you? Are you really? Because you don't know that yet. There are plenty of relationships that fall apart, months, years into the situation. And is it possible? I mean, until you've made that covenant, until you've stood in front of that, that pastor or preacher and you've made that covenant, you don't know that person's going to be your wife or going to be your husband. So how dare you participate in something with someone else's future husband or wife? Someone that doesn't belong to you, that relationship that doesn't belong to you. That's how we value it, not just saying like God wants us to be a prude, but having such a valuation of saying, I'm not going to take that from somebody else that deserves that if they're going to make you their husband or their wife.
Right. And one of the ways that we prepare for marriage is by pursuing purity. Now, purity isn't just something we pursue when we're dating. It's something we have to continue pursuing when we're married. We should all be pursuing purity, no matter what your relationship status is, no matter how old you are. Even Jesus in the Bible, he says, if you even look at somebody with lust, it's like you committed adultery in your heart. So it points to the fact that it starts in our hearts before we do anything with our bodies. You can be a virgin physically, and you can still be an adulterer in your heart. Purity includes what we do with our bodies, but then also what we do in our minds, the images we look at. It's all included in purity. So it's not as if once we get married that the purity problem is solved. If anything, it's just beginning, because there's just as many opportunities to defile the marriage bed after marriage than there are before marriage. Marriage won't fix our sin problem. And we've come across so many couples just in our relationship who are having sex when they're dating, and they look at marriage as the finish line. Like, we just have to make it till marriage because then it won't be sin anymore. But it's dangerous to think of it that way because, well, no, that's not going to be a sin anymore. But there's plenty other temptations for sin after marriage as well. Instead of that being the temptation's going to be not to have sex with each other. Yep. The temptation's going to be to have sex with someone outside of your marriage, to add someone in. The temptation's going to be to look at pornography. So the sin is the problem wherever we're at. And that's what we have to deal with. We have to pursue purity. Whether we're pre-marriage, post-marriage, it's just an ongoing thing that we have to work at.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I know people will say, well, Cameron, but that just sounds so crazy because, like, what about, like, sexual, compatibility, right? Like, how do we know? And, of course, all of us had, like, a terrible uncle who told us, you got to test drive the car before you buy it, right? Like, some dumb wisdom that was given to us in that idea in regards to sex. And there's like, well, how do we know we're going to be sexually compatible? Well, are you a guy? Is she a girl? You're sexually compatible, okay? You'll get together. It'll work, okay? But not only that, but I think that concept is so narrow-minded because it's like there's this conversation like, that's the thing. What if that doesn't line up? As if like that's the end-all, be-all. But let's be real. Sex is one part of it's important, but it's still a small portion of what marriage is, right? I mean, married couples out there, if you guys have sex every day for an hour, which is about right? Just about every day for an hour, right? Even if that was the case, you'd still have 161 hours to fill before the end of the week. It's a small little percentage of what that is. Not saying it doesn't have any value, but it's a small percentage of it. And it's talked about as though, well, if this doesn't work, how is it possibly going to go down? But here's what I think, and this is just my question. And you see if you don't think this is true. I think that for those who decide they're not going to have sex before marriage and then get married, the percentage of people who are sexually incompatible and have an issue that would really, really be difficult to work through is going to be incredibly small. But you know what I think is a pretty big percentage? I see tons of people who get married and listen, they of course, we checked out that we're sexually compatible. And you know what happened? The sex blinded them to 100 other things that were of much greater importance. And then they got married, and then they realized we never figured out that one. We never talked about that one. And all of a sudden, this much higher percentage of, sure, we figured out that we're compatible sexually, but it blinded us to all these other issues that we should have spent more time on than just figuring out we're sexually compatible, right? That really wasn't the big struggle.
Right, and if you're listening to what culture says, if you're just believing what culture tells you about sex, you might be thinking like, well, it's not a big deal, like it's just sex. Or you might think, well, that's old-fashioned and that's impossible. How would you date someone, get all the way till marriage without having sex? But it is possible. We know firsthand it's definitely possible.
We did it.
Yeah, we did that.
We didn't do it.
Yes, that is our story. And not that it wasn't hard not to. It was very hard.
I think people look at us sometimes and they're like, well, you guys, you're probably just so pious. No, the hunger was there, okay, for sure. We dated for a while, and obviously, yeah, like it was like, no, it was difficult. We had already dealt with the fact I was a 23-year-old virgin. She was a 20-year-old virgin. But the situation got really difficult when we started dating and we fell in love with each other. And then all of a sudden, you're so in love with this person and the desire was absolutely there. It's whether or not we actually believe that what God said was going to be a blessing or not.
Right. And we had both made that decision just personally, no matter what the other person decided, going into a relationship, like that is something we wanted to save for marriage. And it was definitely, it wasn't like we're so spiritual that like that wasn't even an issue for us. Like, no, it was a constant issue, constant struggle. That's why we still give advice to people like have a really short engagement, because as your commitment grows, you want the physical intimacy to grow just naturally. And so it was definitely a struggle for us, but I think when you're young too, you do feel like you're missing out. Like when you're 16, 18, that age, like your friends are all doing these things, and there's this tendency to feel like, man, I'm missing out. I'm not having all these experiences that my friends are having. And just me, from being on the other side of it, like I never regret having any of those experiences, like forgoing any of those experiences. I don't think if I had those experiences that it would have added anything positive to my life at this point. I only see positive coming out of kind of denying myself of those experiences.
Agreed. The very same for me, yeah.
And one verse that we always comes to mind when we talk about this is Luke 7:35, when Jesus says, "But wisdom is shown to be right by the lives of those who follow it." And we really do believe that this is wisdom. This is just how God created. He created sex and he created marriage, and that it's wisdom. And if you choose to follow it, your life is going to show the results of it. And that's why we do share our story and our testimony, because we believe that we've applied this wisdom to our life, and we've got to see the benefit of it, that it does bring blessing into your life, that there's so many things that we've had to see our friends and just people we know go through in marriage because of past relationships, because of things that happened to them that we've never even had to deal with, the struggles that we haven't had because we chose to save that for marriage. And it's only brought blessings. So we just share, not to shame anybody or not, to bring condemnation to anybody, but to bring encouragement that, it is possible, number one, and it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely worth it. Now, to kind of wrap all this up, to come to a conclusion, okay, so what we're saying, right, our culture and God have two different evaluations of marriage, okay? They're in two different places, and which one we lean into, which one we follow is going to take us in two different directions. If we're pre-marriage right now, the idea of leaning into what culture says about dating or what God says about dating is going to set us up for two different realities. We know that if we want a valuable marriage, we have to start valuing marriage now. We can't wait until we're married to start valuing it. The idea that we can do, become the right person, find the right person, do it the right way. Prepare for marriage, don't practice marriage. And here's what I would love to invite is all of you, I think you have some application to this and what it looks like in your life, okay? For some of you, you're pre-marriage. You're younger, not even dating yet. You are dating, you're engaged, you're looking forward to these things. You have such an awesome opportunity right now because you have the ability to take and set yourself up for an extremely valuable marriage by taking the right steps and valuing it and going through these things so you can really craft the most valuable marriage. Listen, whatever effort you're going to put into and energy you're going to put into now is going to pay dividends when you get married and you get farther along instead of working at it then. Now, I understand this though. Many of you would say, it's great, I just wish I would have heard this 10, 20, 30 years ago, right? I've already made a ton of mistakes. I've already dishonored marriage. Is it too late for me? And I would say that depends on what you think about marriage. Do you believe that marriage is what culture says it is? That it really is just this agreement between two people? Is that the evaluation that you have of marriage? Because in that case, then, yes, it's too late for you. The stuff you've done has messed it up. If it's just what culture says it is, that marriage is just an agreement between two people, you already messed yourself up a substantial amount if you haven't done these things, and you are going to bring a severely decreased value to the marriage, and you are going to have problems. But if you believe marriage is what God says marriage is, where he says actually what it is it's two people coming together in covenant with God, and that he takes and he makes two into one, that God is a member of the marriage, and that he brings two hearts into one, then I have great news for you. It's not too late at all, because our God is, man, he is a specialist in renovations. He is a specialist in do-overs. He is a specialist in restorations inside of people's hearts and lives. We see story after story of this in the Bible. We see a story of Abram, right, who was supposed to birth the Jewish nation, and he did stupid stuff in regards to his marriage and sexually, and yet God still took, because he stayed near him, he took and he renewed his relationship and blessed him. We see a man like Samson, who absolutely did not value marriage. He never became married, but he did everything wrong before marriage, and yet because he kept his heart close to God during that, God forgave him and healed him and brought about benefit in his life. We see a man like David, who took and rejected the things that were right for his life in regards to his sexuality, slept with another man's wife, had him killed, these terrible things. But he turned his heart back to God, and God actually healed that, and not only that, but said that David had a heart after his once again. You see, our God has the ability to bring restoration to things that are broken. He specializes in this. Remember, purity isn't a line. It's not that you're pure and then you do some things and you're unpure. Purity is a direction that you can choose to walk in any day. Anytime, wherever you're at, you can choose to begin to walk towards purity at any time. If you're in a relationship right now and you've blasted past all the do it the right way stuff, where you're like, man, we have not done it the right way. We have not done this the right way. We've already crossed all these boundaries. I guess it's over. We can't go back. I would say, no, you can't go back, but you can start today. No, you can't go back and take away the dishonorable things you do, but you could start honoring marriage today. That verse that we've read multiple times, Hebrews 13:4 in the NIV. Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure, and God will judge the adulterer and the sexually immoral. You can start honoring marriage today. What's the opposite of honor? Dishonor, right? You can stop dishonoring marriage in the relationship you're in. Some of you, you're in a relationship with somebody, and you have this relationship, and you want God to bless it. You want God to turn it into something good. So I would say to you, then stop actively cursing it right now with sin. Stop putting curses on it right now. Ask God to forgive and watch him if he can heal and he can bring something about. But what you need to do is start honoring today. And last but certainly not least, some of you are married. And like I said, first of all, really important that you understand this, because people who are pre-marriage are going to come and ask you questions, and you don't want to just give them tips. You want to give them something that's foundational. So knowing this stuff is so important, but also, okay, there are some of you that when you've heard all this, you realized you didn't do this process. Here you are, you're married, but you never honored marriage in the beforehand. You didn't become the right person. And here you are married, and listen, the reality is maybe you need to play catch up. Because you realize I did not bring to this marriage the best version of myself. I have not only just worked like, oh, we need to work on this. Maybe it's, I need to work on me. Man, my heart is messed up. I need to get right with my faith so I can bless this marriage. I need to do some catch-up work because I didn't do this before we got married. And here I am trying to be part of a marriage, and I need to do work on myself. Second, the idea of finding the right person. If you're married, there's your person. There's your person. And the reason why I say that is because you might be tempted to think, well, I didn't do this process, so is this the right person? And maybe the enemy would even be tempting you to think, see, maybe you're supposed to be with somebody else. And I would say, no, if you made that covenant, look at that person. They're the right person. Get that mindset of maybe there's somebody else out of your mind and recognize what I need to do is not compare that man or that woman to everybody else. I need to realize that's my husband or that's my wife, and I need to make that person the right person. I need to start celebrating their strengths. I need to start working with them in their weaknesses because that's my person. And last, but again, not least, is the idea of just the right way. Amy said it. Purity isn't for before marriage. Purity is throughout our marriage. It's continuing on, and likely if you didn't do it right before marriage, maybe there's even things right now that are just not right in your marriage. There might be struggles of turning away from each other and having an unhealthy sex life, or a draw to other people who are outside of the marriage, or a draw to things like pornography to satiate our desires. And we could still be in this place where we need to work up at purity. But not only that, is you just might look at each other as a couple and say, we did everything wrong. We did everything wrong. I know your story, you know my story, and look at us. We didn't value marriage at all before we got here. We did everything wrong, and here we are married, and how is this going to work? And this is where I would tell you, this is why it's important to view marriage as something that's spiritual. It's not just an agreement. That if that's the case, and you did everything wrong, and you think, is it too late? I'm telling you, it's not too late if God's involved with it. That you could take your husband's hands, you could take your wife's hands, and you could say, would you pray with me? And you could say, God, would you forgive us? Would you forgive us for not valuing marriage properly? Man, we did everything wrong. We didn't care about marriage before we got here, and here we are in this marriage today. But God, would you do the work that you said you can do? Because at the beginning of your word, you said that you can take two people and you can turn them into one person, and I don't even understand how that works. But could you take us, who have made so many mistakes, and could you take and take away some of the pain? Could you take away some of the scars that we put on ourselves by the choices that we made and the things that we did and the places we went and the things we participated in? Could you pull those things away from us and heal us? And then could you take our two hearts, Jesus, and could you push them together? Could you heal our marriage so that it would be just like two people who did everything right because we trust that you're the one who brings us together and makes us a married couple, not us. It's not our agreement. You're the one who binds this covenant together. And ask God and watch as he doesn't do miracle work inside of it. We've seen this done over and over again in people's lives when they get honest and humble before God and say, God, would you take and do something in our marriage? He cares and he's a part of that marriage today. Amy, would you pray just to close up this time?
Yes. God, I thank you so much for this time. We thank you that you do have a plan for us, that you have a plan for our marriages, that having you a part of our marriage makes all the difference, God. And I just pray for your Holy Spirit to just work in every single heart in this place. Whatever place we sit today, whether we're pre-marriage, God, I pray that you would just be speaking just how valuable we are to you, that we don't have to be married to be valuable to you. Anyone who finds themselves single, I pray that you would just help them as they walk towards your call for them, God. Make your call so evident for your life that you have great plans for their life. No matter if it includes a relationship later on or not, they're valuable to you and that you love them, God. I pray that you would just help us to know what lies we're believing right now, that there's people who are probably hearing, nobody would want you. No Christian man's ever going to want you. You've made too many mistakes. He's not talking about you. It applies to everyone else but you. Those are all lies. God, help us to hear your truth, that you can do the impossible. Give people the faith that if they don't believe, that they believe their marriage is too far gone, there's too many mistakes, God. Give them the faith to believe that you can do the impossible. You can do more than we ask or imagine, God. And we do just believe that you are the ultimate healer. God, that you can heal us individually, you can heal us from our past hurts, and you can heal us in our marriages in a spiritual way, God. We're just believing that you are going to do work in us going out from here, that this isn't the end, this is just the beginning. And I pray that you would help us walk towards you, whatever place we're at today, God, that we would pursue purity like never before, that we would pursue stronger marriages, and that you would meet us there, God. You do the work that only you can do and restore us, God. Bring healing to us. And we thank you for everything that you've done in us, and we just pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.